For Veterans Only is a national television news magazine for America's veterans and a presentation of Veterans Productions USA. Reporting for Veterans Only is Brian Patrick.
It's well known that with the changes in Eastern Europe and the reduced communist threat, the Defense Department is looking to cut its troop strength. What isn't known is how deep those cuts will go and who might be affected by them. But there is no doubt that as more people move from active duty to veteran status, there will be an impact on veteran services. The question is, can the system handle it? Mary Miller went looking for the answer.
The U.S. military has just over 2 million men and women in uniform worldwide. To maintain that level, it discharges about 300,000 of them each year. But the diminishing Soviet threat has the Pentagon looking at discharging an additional 100 to 150,000 service members each year for the next 5 years. That could happen in several ways, like early retirement, voluntary early out, that is prior to finishing a multi-year obligation, or involuntary separation. The cuts are likely to come across the board from all ranks and specialties. But this drawdown differs significantly from the one after Korea and Vietnam, and it's affecting the way everyone hopes to handle it.
During those first two drawdowns, a lot of those people were people who were drafted into the military and were happy to go back. Well, all of our people that we will be reducing today came in the all-voluntary force expecting to have a full career. But what we want to do is limit the adverse impact on our veterans who are leaving us, because we certainly don't want to send out several 100,000 who have served the country well, honorably, and not assist them in that role. We're looking at things such as providing separation pay, for example, to our enlisted force. At the present time, we give separation pay to officers and to reserve enlisted people. So we want to make it, it's a matter of equity, and we want to treat all people the same way. We're looking at the possibility of extending PX, post-exchange, and commissary privileges for a certain length of time to help them during this transition period. People are very concerned about health care. That's the number one benefit that people always say is the reason they stay in service, medical benefits. So we're talking about expanding that and allowing people to have some medical coverage for the first few months out, while they would be afforded the opportunity to buy maybe some medical insurance or start working for an employer that would have medical care coverage. We're working with some states and trying to set up some programs that would assist the service members in job placement. We would have job market information, and we would tell this individual, if you're willing to relocate to this location, this city in the continental U.S., there's a job in this specific field that you have the qualifications for. The majority of our military members have served as platform instructors one time or the other, and we have a number of people who have majored in math and science. So the states out there are very interested in getting this group of people into the classroom, because almost every state has a shortage in math and science teachers. So we're looking at expanding the unemployment compensation. Right now, the military members receive 13 weeks. They have to wait 30 days prior to receiving that. One of the options we're looking at is expanding that to 26 weeks, the same as civilians get now, and also only have a 1 week waiting period before you do it.
Ambitious plans with a price tag.
All of that is going to cost money, yes.
What's the prognosis? I mean, you feel you have to go to Congress?
We would like to think that Congress would give us some money to help support this. In the past, the history, though, has been in the past, they have often asked us to fund it out of our own resources. So.
Besides the Defense Department, the veteran community is gearing up to ease active duty personnel into its ranks. The biggest concern is the impact on the job market.
A number of people are projecting a slowdown in the economy. At the same time that's happening, of course, our armed services are reducing. So we're going to find large numbers of people on that economy, which is slowing down, looking for employment. When the economy slows down, jobs get tighter. So the transition, which would already be difficult, will be made even more difficult.
Now, for the Vietnam generation, many individuals opted for the heavy industrial and manufacturing sectors because for a variety of reasons, families, the limited amount of benefits for education, for a variety of reasons, they gravitated to the heavy industrial and manufacturing sectors because they paid reasonably, they paid good, solid, middle-income union wages. And while it wasn't necessarily taxing their intellectual capabilities, it was a quick and easy way to earn a decent living. Those times are gone. And yet we're looking at another glut on the job market from demobilization. And those people don't have anything comparable to go to.
But the Labor Department's Division of Veterans Employment and Training says it welcomes the new veterans and has already launched a pilot program called TAP, or Transition Assistance Program, now operating at 18 military bases in 7 states. In coordination with the Defense and Veterans Affairs Departments, it involves a series of workshops offering departing service members assistance in getting a job and VA benefits.
They will not be returning from a war zone. They will be better prepared as to skills, and certainly they will have the qualities that we in the Veterans Employment and Training Service are emphasizing to employers, which are they're highly motivated, they're disciplined, and loyal workers, which is a commodity that is being sought by most all employers in this country right now, especially as we go through the next decade toward the year 2000, noting that there will be a worker shortage. Overall, veterans in this country enjoy a better than average employment rate. So we are focusing on those special subgroups of veterans who tend to have multiple barriers to employment.
While there may be jobs out there, will there be enough staff to handle the projected increase in applicants, especially when Congress is considering expanding the TAP program?
It could require additional resources. We certainly will be planning ahead as best we can in asking for and allocating the resources that will be needed. They could be significant, but I think it's also important to point out that they would be temporary in nature. And certainly the Congress is very interested in providing this smooth transition, as well as us in the administration.
Other services to be impacted are those provided by the VA. Take education. Many of the new veterans will be eligible for the Montgomery GI Bill, where the government matches a person's own contribution. Will the fund run out of money?
The money's already there. It's over $1 billion has already been paid in by these young men and women. And all 1 million of them are not going to school at the same time. In fact, we wish all 1 million would eventually use the education benefits, but we'll be doing well if we get 65 to 80% of them to use the educational benefits. So you have some that won't use the benefits, yet they paid in $1,200. So we've got that extra money.
But there is concern once again over staffing. Can the VA, already stretched to the limit, handle additional applicants for not only education but vocational rehabilitation as well, where there's already more than a 3-month waiting period for a first interview?
Right now we have about 400,000 a year into GI Bill type programs at the VA. With the advent of the new Montgomery GI Bill in 1985, we have been expecting to watch a slight uprise to around 500,000 over the next 4 or 5 years. I think even if we could believe exactly what we hear in the papers, it would only mean a couple of thousand additional enrollments a month over the next 3, 4, 5 years. It'll cause additional work, of course it will, but there's no. But that's what we're here for, and I mean we will place our priorities there. If it, let's say that the process would be a little slower than when we need the people, our folks will work overtime. They'll do what they have to do. If there's a certain area of the country that has higher discharge rates than others, we sometimes will send task force in to help with that.
Wyant says he has budgeted for more people over the next several years, but says they would come from other VA programs that could spare them. There is yet another concern over the impact troop cuts will have on the housing program. Thousands of active duty personnel and veterans currently have VA home loans.
So if a large number of those veterans and active duty persons lose their jobs as a result of the cutback and are unable to gain employment elsewhere, then the impact could be one of increased foreclosures. They default on their loans because they don't have a job that enables them to continue making their loan payments. So that then would have a ripple effect on the rest of the economy. When there's a large loss of employment in a particular area, property values generally go down. And frequently when property values go down, even those people who haven't lost their jobs become discouraged because they see that their property is worth, in many instances, a lot less than what they owe on that loan. So frequently we find that they pack up and leave. I wouldn't say it spells disaster, but it's a scenario that we would like to avoid if we can. Anytime we have a large number of foreclosures in an area,
it costs the taxpayers money because funds have to be appropriated in order to pay these guarantee claims.
Pedigo says he has an extensive counseling program to help keep delinquent veterans on track and enough employees, for the moment, to staff it.
If the workload in other parts of the program is down, then we can divert personnel into the servicing area. If we're unable to do that, then in many instances, we are able to go to Congress and convince them that giving us additional personnel will have a payback for the government.
Still, there are skeptics for whom Congress may provide little relief.
Their system is reaching its limits in terms of certain service areas, and we think that they may be underestimating the impact.
There isn't much evidence of any willingness to put any resources behind the proposals. And unless something in that department changes, we're basically going to be putting a lot of programs on the books that aren't going to be capable of delivering the services that were intended. And that's not fair to the veterans who are relying on the government for assistance.
We've got a mighty big organization out there in the Veterans Department. It's about the second largest as far as employees in the government, next to the military. And I think that the Secretary will just have to shift these people around, and we can work it out. It's going to have to be an adjustment. I don't think we're going to be able to add a lot of employees to the veterans payroll, quite frankly.
Why?
Well, we don't have the money.
There are several areas where little impact is expected from the sudden increase in veterans. One is medical care. That's because the majority of the newly separated are not likely to be the Category A type that the VA currently serves. They are those with a service-connected disability generally associated with a recent war, or those who are low income. The same goes for the VA pension program for low-income wartime veterans totally disabled by a non-service-connected injury, and the disability compensation program for any veteran with a service-connected disability. Officials say there just won't be that many of them.
There are clearly varying opinions on how big an impact the troop reduction will have and how best to handle it. The hope is everyone involved will have the answers, lest this newest wave of veterans fall between the cracks. In Washington, I'm Mary Miller for Veterans Only.
Since we first exposed a scam aimed at the families of deceased veterans last fall, more deceptive funeral sales practices have surfaced, this time in Arizona. The Arizona Attorney General's office has filed charges against Heritage Memorial Service, alleging that Heritage falsely implied a connection with the VA and the Arizona National Cemetery in its marketing to veterans and their families. In light of this new development, we thought it a good time to take another look at Mike Victor's investigative report.
A veteran returning home. His last trip is to the National Cemetery, where the flag is lowered to half-staff for everyone who comes in. About 10% of all veterans are buried in national cemeteries, the majority choosing a plot with the rest of the family. In Florida, where the elderly veteran population is the highest, the private cemetery and funeral businesses are booming. Many are conglomerates with a primary interest of profit. For Veterans Only began to hear reports from around the nation. They told of deceptive advertising, high-pressure sales tactics, and sales material implying a government connection. Our Freedom of Information request was returned, mostly blacked out, due to the status of the cases and other people involved. However, the Department of Veterans Affairs' Don Moore agreed to interview through VetsLink at PBS Channel 6 Denver.
But we do have complaints, and I've got some of my files from New York, Florida, Minnesota, Texas, Colorado, and Oregon. Ads appear in the newspapers which indicate all sorts of things. The first is that the VA has run out of space in the national cemeteries. And of course, that's not true. Another technique is that the cemetery that is advertising tries to connote some sort of connection between their cemetery and the federal government.
Several ads, which Moore said did exactly that, belong to businesses in Central Florida. Beach Funeral Home is also the address of Veteran Security Plan, whose ad features the entrance of Florida National Cemetery. Phone requests for information received only questions, so we went in person. Hi, how are you?
Good.
Is this your advertisement, sir?
Yes, it is.
Are you connected with Florida National Cemetery?
I am not.
Can you tell us, is there an effort to connect your funeral service with Florida National Cemetery?
There is not.
Can you tell us what it means that Veteran Security Plan is showing the Florida National Cemetery opening on the top of their ad?
Just simply to make people aware of the National Cemetery and what their VA benefits are.
I see. Would you be willing to take a few minutes and talk with us and explain to us what you're doing? Thank you. What prompted you to run that ad?
Well, we never really thought that we were giving people that impression. When we came out with this ad, this is simply the front of the Veteran Cemetery. And all we did was have an artist sketch it through an ad company, and this is what they had been using. It ran a few times, we got some complaints, so we changed it.
It conveys the false impression that they are operating with the approval of the Department of Veterans Affairs, which I suppose could create a vulnerability on the part of the veteran consumer, perhaps to obtain services or products that are unnecessary in order to be buried in the National Cemetery.
We didn't feel that we took advantage of anybody. What we got back was from the government is that there was a good possibility that someone could be taken advantage of. So we were happy to change it for them.
If they put their name in the paper and associated it with VA, in that time when someone dies, it's not the most pleasant time in folks' lives. We understand that, and so does the industry. And if the family remembers seeing an ad from this particular firm, they may feel that, well, they're the ones who take care of the veterans. And that's a false impression.
This is Florida Memorial Cemetery in Cocoa. It's a private cemetery, one of dozens owned by Gibraltar Mausoleums of Indianapolis. They too are advertising to veterans, claiming a lack of burial space in national cemeteries. So we came here to ask them why. Hello, we're looking for this location. Is this your cemetery here?
Yes, it is.
Are you affiliated with the armed forces in any way?
What did you need?
Pardon me?
What did you need?
We want to know, is the cemetery affiliated with the armed forces or the Veterans Administration? It is? How is it affiliated?
No, I don't know.
It's not?
Oh, they got this here, so I don't know what they're talking about.
Ma'am, do you know, are you familiar with this ad? Is this your cemetery?
This is our cemetery, yes, sir.
Are you familiar? The first woman was a staff person, obviously not sure of the connection. However, the office manager was sure and asked us in to talk with a Mr. Rapier, the director. After a wait, I was informed it would be a private visit.
Mr. Rapier will be happy to see you, but not with the camera.
He will talk with us, but not with the camera? Okay, I'll talk with him.
All right, that.
And a good while later,
Mr. Rapier prefers that you send him a letter and stating the complaint, and he'll be happy to then call you and make an appointment.
Florida Memorial's parent company, Gibraltar Mausoleum, has made headlines charged with deceptive sales practices.
What resulted in that particular case was the state of Minnesota filed a suit, and that particular company was fined $65,000 by the state of Minnesota.
The veterans population is being sold through every medium. There have been reports of a similar radio ad in New York City. Direct mail-outs are popular, as well as newspapers of all sizes. They come under dozens of different names, offering free services to entice veterans to reserve space in their cemeteries. Some providing funeral services for those buried in national cemeteries have found ways to take advantage of the unwary.
What happened after is after I'd made my funeral plan, see, this lady called me and wanted to sell me this vault. And she was telling me that I'd have to have it because I have this funeral plan. She said, it's supposed to be through the Ollinger Company here in Denver, if I'm supposed to say names if I am or not, but that's it. And so I signed up for it, and I got to thinking, as I said, that can't be so. So I called out, she said, no, that wasn't true. So I called this lady and canceled it outright that day. I didn't take that vault, and she was very unhappy with me.
I have another file from the Fort Logan National Cemetery here in Denver, and it is replete with these kinds of calls, mainly from the high-pressure sales folks who are somewhere sitting in some kind of a telephone bank, and they're out to make their quotas.
Dozens of incidents are being investigated, including one which sounds like getting a plot in Arlington National Cemetery is impossible. It is true that no one can reserve space in any national cemetery, but the VA says their expansion plans will keep up with the demand. Florida National Cemetery in Bushnell opened in June 1988. There are more than 400 acres of rural, wide-open spaces, with about one-third already developed for burials.
As of this date, we have accomplished approximately 1,900 interments of veterans and the veterans' dependents. We have the potential to develop an additional 275 acres, which will eventually give us a total gravesite capacity of over 100,000.
Congress authorized funding last year to study expanding the system further. The new San Joaquin Valley National Cemetery is about to be built in California. The Department of Veterans Affairs does admit that there are some places where it may be difficult to find space in a national cemetery. The St. Augustine National Cemetery, for example, has been closed for over 2 years. The few remaining spots are reserved for the spouses of veterans already interred here.
The graves here begin to go back to the period of the Spanish-American War and the Indian Wars. You also see a lot of unknown soldier tombstones. These are from the Indian War, Second Seminole Indian War.
About 3,000 soldiers are buried in this historic one-block cemetery, which began in 1828. It is cared for like the shrine it is, one of 113 nationwide.
Well, these pyramids are the last resting place of the bones and remains of approximately 1,500 of the casualties from the Second Seminole Indian War. The men died or were killed at various places around the state, or around the peninsula, and at the end of the war, their remains were returned here to St. Augustine for common interment in these vaults.
Personal markers were allowed in the old cemeteries. Now all resting places line in formation. The marker is provided by the government, along with the space, opening and closing, and perpetual care. The markers and a grave allowance of about $150 are given to veterans buried in private cemeteries. All receive a flag, but there have been reports of high mileage charges to pick them up. Some have found ways to charge for anything.
One of the funeral directors, who's a member of the American Legion, told me that when the private cemetery receives the government headstone, they saw a foot off of the bottom and sell it back to the family for $100 as a memento of their loved one. Sometimes they will inscribe that for them. That's theft of government property.
The Department of Veterans Affairs says it wants to hear all complaints. They can also be taken to the Better Business Bureau or to the State Attorney's Office, as in the Minnesota case. Making arrangements for funeral and burial can be very complex and can be further complicated if no plans were made before the time of death. The veteran's best advice: shop around as you would for any other major purchase, and remember to seek information from a representative of your national cemetery. In Bushnell, Florida, Mike Victor reporting for Veterans Only.
After this story first aired, the Department of Veterans Affairs released a 2-page information sheet about deceptive funeral sales practices and how you should handle them. For a free copy, write to VA Hotline, P.O. Box 1777, Louisville, Kentucky 40201. That's VA Hotline, P.O. Box 1777, Louisville, Kentucky 40201. Next week on For Veterans Only, Dawn Murray begins a new series called Labor Hotline, with a look at how veterans' preference works in job service offices. And Mary Miller tells us how new doctors training in VA hospitals help to improve veterans' health care. I'm Brian Patrick. Thanks for being with us. We hope you'll join us next time on For Veterans Only.
Are you having trouble locating an old service buddy? For Veterans Only is now offering a special book designed to assist you in your search. How to Locate Anyone Who Is or Has Been in the Military is a comprehensive guide to conducting a successful search for current and former military personnel. This valuable resource is an essential tool for reunion planners or anyone trying to locate an old friend. To order your copy of this unique book, just call 1-800-874-VETS. That's 1-800-874-VETS. Or send a check or money order for $15.95 to Locator Book, Post Office Box 474, Florence, Kentucky 41022.
For Veterans Only is made possible by the Military Veterans Network of ITT Sheridan, welcoming, training, and assisting military and veteran reunion planners. By Galaxy Tours of Wayne, Pennsylvania, a world leader for national and international group travel. By VFW, the Veterans of Foreign Wars. VFW means service to America's veterans. And by the PVA, the Paralyzed Veterans of America, and PVA Sports, working for the best. The producers thank this station and other public television stations for their assistance in making this program available. For Veterans Only is also telecast on the Armed Forces Radio and Television Service for the benefit of the men and women serving on active duty in our armed forces at home and abroad.